everyone is doing okay today. I have upgraded my system, so I'm hoping the live stream goes well. This is going to be the first live stream that I have with the new rig. So fingers crossed, hopefully the world is good and we don't get the slowdown issues. I spent like an hour talking to the guy at Best Buy to make sure that this was the system that I needed before changing out the internet. So far it's stable, knock on wood. Let's hope it stays that way. So hope everyone is doing okay this morning. I can't stay today. I have a clinic visit, but I wanted to test this out before I left. So far, so good. Fingers crossed. Let's keep it going. So this is going to involve one Mr. Bernie Sanders. Now, from the perspective again of a person sitting on the moon looking at events on the planet, what does the world look like? And this is in context of Venezuela. What's been taking place in Venezuela with the United States implementing a coup, a naked, at this point, coup. This guy, Juan Guaidó, is declaring himself interim president of Venezuela. How did he get that role? He didn't run for the office. He essentially was chosen by the United States, as Marco Rubio, John Bolton, Mike Pompeo, Donald Trump has all just said, we're just going to declare him president. And we're just going to acknowledge him president and pretend as if the guy who got elected isn't president of Venezuela. This is in context to the economic sanctions that have essentially ravaged the economy. There's been other issues, don't get me wrong. Maduro is not necessarily, you know, the greatest leader on the planet, but whether he's the greatest leader on the planet is irrelevant. It's none of our business. These guys have taken a policy with the idea of taking Maduro out that office in the same way they tried to get Chavez out that office. And the wild part about this is the United States has openly supported the opposition leaders in the country itself. Meaning, the people who are in power, Maduro knows that the people who are going against him, meaning the gangs and that type of stuff, and the protests, many of these people are paid off. The United States has been giving resources to the people in the country itself in order to order opposition forces in the country in order to nakedly take Maduro out that office. Not to mention working with other countries that fall in line with the United States interests that are in that region. I guess what I'm saying is, it is none of our business what is taking place in Venezuela. If Venezuela is having a difficult time because of mismanagement of the government itself, that is an issue for Venezuela. At the point where economic sanctions in the United States starts taking a specific and definitive interest in changing the government of the country itself, you're talking about a coup. And in this case, it's somewhat of a naked coup when the United States just says, we're not going to acknowledge the fact that the person got elected. I find it to be amazing. The United States has a pretty bloody track record when it comes to South America. And I'll just read through it. 1954, Guatemala. Under military rulers after the coup, meaning essentially 1944, the violent U.S.-backed dictatorship of Jorge Ubico was overthrown by a popular uprising. The victory of the uprising brought peace to the country for 10 years, its culmination being the election in 1951 of progressive Arbenz, who sought an agrarian reform. I remember this. I think I covered this from the standpoint of blowback. In 1954, the CIA launched codename Operation PB Success. The country's capital, Guatemala, was bombed with warplanes. The CIA literally assisted with the bombing of the country. Under military rulers after the coup, Guatemala suffered 3 decades of brutal repression in which many as 200,000 people died, and many of them campesinos killed by security forces. The wild part about the Guatemala one, the reforms that the guy wanted to implement, Arbenz, were reforms based on, if I'm not mistaken, United Fruit. United Fruit had taken so much land and had so much political influence. He wanted to put through just basic reforms. And they call him a communist, and the CIA worked in order to get him out of office. Let's keep going. 1959 in Haiti. Let's flip. I have a point here. Haiti is as strategic to the United States as the Dominican Republic and Cuba, but in Haiti the story is different. In 1959, 2 years after coming to power, Franco's Duvalier, with the help of the CIA, created a rural militia called the Tonton Macoute after Haiti Creole boogeyman in response to discontent among the people in the developing dictatorial rule. The Macoute, which by 1961 was twice as big as the army, never developed into a real military force, but was more than just a secret police terrorizing those who opposes the US-backed dictator. During the presidency until 1986, prisons and torture centers claimed the lives of hundreds of victims. Arbitrary arrests, torture, deaths in custody, enforcement, disappearances, and political killings were regularly reported. In 1964, Brazil. In the early 1960s, years of incredible transformation in Brazil, President João Goulart implemented the Basic Reforms Plan, which aimed to combat adult literacy, control transfer of profits by multinational corporate companies with the headquarters abroad by reforming tax laws, expropriate land, and redistribute to the population. Again, basic reforms. People had bought up all of the land and resources, and the public was essentially in desperate poverty. He just wanted basic reforms. In 1964, a military coup ousted Goulart. Lincoln Gordon served as the U.S. ambassador, playing a major role in support of the opposition against the government of Goulart and during the coup. On March 27, 1964, he wrote a top-secret cable to the United States government urging it to support a coup of Humberto Alcázar Castelo Branco with the clandestine delivery of arms and shipments and gas and oil possibly supplied by the CIA covert operations. Uruguay. In 1971, Roberto was elected president under the Colorado Party. He led a coup in June 1973 with the blessings of the CIA and remained in power until 1976, when he, in turn, was overthrown by the military. Under Boulevard and Operation Condor, hundreds of people were murdered, tortured, imprisoned, kidnapped, and disappeared. We had no issue with dictators when they served our interests. Let's keep going. 1971 Bolivia. Juan Jose Torres took power and implemented reforms to benefit workers and those living in poverty. Hope returned to Bolivia. In less than a year of power, he was overthrown by a bloody coup led by the junta of commanders of the armed forces. Despite massive resistance, both civilian and military, the conservative forces applied brutality without compunction. Banzer ruled the country for the next 7 years, working with the Operation Condor and the CIA to silence all dissent. 1973, Chile. The agency led a smear campaign against the government of Chile, as is currently doing in Venezuela. They used national and international media to demonize socialist president Salvador Allende. Doesn't this sound familiar? Doesn't this sound familiar? By causing scarcity through extortion, through torture, imprisonment, and forced disappearances and assassinations, the CIA and right-wing forces in the country attempted to destabilize the country, especially after Allende nationalized national resources. On September 11, 1973, Pinochet led the military all the way to the presidential palace with the backing of the CIA, who provided him with all the necessary weapons and armored vehicles. Doesn't this sound familiar? 1976, Argentina. 1980, El Salvador. 1989, Panama. 1990, Peru. Then we get to Ronald Reagan and all this other stuff. I guess my point is this. We have a bloody track record in South America. And it's not a mystery. It's not a secret. It's not something that nobody knows. At this point, it's out in the open. What they've been doing from the standpoint of Venezuela has also been out in the open, with Pompeo and Bolton being very open that they want to get Maduro out of office by hook or by crook. And this is somewhat of a naked play at trying to remove him from office. Whatever, again, you want to think of Maduro is secondary to, do you want and is it the responsibility of the United States to instigate itself into the affairs of other nations? Doesn't matter if we agree. We support dictators all throughout the world, and we had no issue supporting those dictators when they were in our pockets. So when I see Bernie Sanders leave a tweet like this, it rubs me the wrong way, even though, even with this tweet, he's further in. I could be wrong in my perception of this, because I want to explain why there's a two-step here from a political standpoint, and why there's such a hedge in the way that Bernie Sanders talks about issues like Syria and this one. He's been more open mouth with Syria, but issues like this. Take a look at Sanders' comment. The Maduro government has waged a violent crackdown. Well, let's blow it up. Let's start it off. Come on. The Maduro government has waged a violent crackdown on Venezuelan civil society, violated the Constitution by dissolving the National Assembly, and was re-elected last year in the election that many observers said was fraudulent. The economy is a disaster and millions are migrating. That's essentially the main talking point. Anything that you read, for the most part, goes with that talking point. The reality of it is, the United States has been paying off opposition forces and supporting opposition forces. If this was taking place in this country, it would be called treason, because it would be treason. A foreign government that is hostile to your government's interests is giving money and resources in order to topple the elected government. Now, when they put Facebook and Twitter ads, we've had to hear about that shit for 2 years. That Russia was trying to take down the government of the United States. That Russia was attacking the government of the United States. That we are in open war with Russia because of Facebook and Twitter ads, the majority of which took place after the election, and in some cases were going back and forth. A conspiracy theory. But we've had to hear about it for 2 years. Russia is trying to topple democracy itself. What are we doing? What are we doing? How are we simultaneously screaming about Russia while simultaneously attacking another nation with economic attacks, propaganda attacks, and giving money to the opposition in that country to take down the elected government of that country? Sanders knows this, and yet Sanders puts out the original line. Then he moderates. The United States should support the rule of law, fair elections, and self-determination for the Venezuelan people. We must condemn the use of violence against unarmed protesters and the suppression of dissent. Well, the problem here is not necessarily dissent. The problem here is that a foreign government is giving resources in order to take down the elected government of the country itself. There may be an issue with dissent, but the fact of the matter is what the United States has been doing with Facebook, Twitter, and all this other stuff could also be called a suppression of dissent, with this idea of supposedly Russia hacking the elections. My point is, when a country is under assault or when a country is under attack by a hostile force, they take certain measures that suppress dissent. All countries do it. The United States did it when it was at war in World War I, when it threw, oh God, I can't think of the gentleman's name, the socialist, in prison. I mean, I guess the point I'm making here is, let's be very clear, Venezuela is under assault. We tend not to look at it that way because we only look at it through the lens of the United States. But if you were in Venezuela right now, you would understand that you were under economic assault and that Donald Trump has put all options on the table, meaning there could be a potential military assault. The country is under assault. The actions that the country is taking is on the basis of the country being under assault. Just saying. I condemn this also. We should have free and fair elections. We should have self-determination for Venezuela. But do you believe that the United States putting in a puppet government is the same thing as self-determination? This tweet irked the shit out of me. And then he comes to his main point that he wanted to get at, but he had to say the other stuff first. But we must learn the lessons of the past and not be in the business of regime change or supporting coups. And we have, as we have in Chile, Guatemala, Brazil, Dominican Republic, the United States has a long history of inappropriately intervening in Latin American nations. We must not go down that road again. Yes, that's true. I was searching myself to figure out why I dislike this so much. I think the reason I dislike this so much is because Sanders knows that the United States has been attacking that government. Sanders knows that when a government is under military assault, that the government behaves in ways in order to rebuff the fact that it's under military assault by a hostile, larger, existential threat. Meaning, it is not self-determination to put a puppet government in Venezuela. So just to be clear, Sanders also knows that the crackdown on Venezuela, quote unquote, civil society has to do with, you can say, the support that's been given to opposition, not to mention, this being in a hostile force. This is not to absolve Maduro, so don't misunderstand me. I'm just saying both of those things can be true simultaneously at the same time. The entire point of Sanders writing this was this part. We must learn the lessons of the past. But he didn't want to just say that. He needed to add this other stuff in for political effect. I hope that's clear. The real perspective here is this. We shouldn't be in the business of regime change. That's problematic. But he wanted to have his cake and eat it too, and he didn't want to be attacked by people who kept calling him, oh, look at the socialist who's defending the socialist country of Venezuela. That's a stupid attack. But he's been attacked like that. Look at his old debate, where he was in the debate, in the last debate, recent debate he was in with the Republican from Vermont. He brought up this thing of, yeah, you want to turn the United States into Venezuela. So Sanders is under a certain degree of political pressure here not to necessarily be open-mouthed in his defense of Venezuela. And it's not even a defense of Venezuela. It's a defense of not fomenting coups and revolutions in other countries that is going to cause chaos. Our government is not even open. Our government is shut down, and still in the process of a shutdown, they're still going through the process of creating strife and chaos in another country. I could be wrong in my assessment of this, so don't misunderstand me. From a political standpoint, Bernie Sanders probably feels like he has to do this two-step of, yeah, Maduro's not a great guy, but we shouldn't be in the process of coups. But in doing that, he legitimizes the arguments that people have been using in order to legitimize what the United States has been doing in those other countries. And the people who don't fully pay attention to politics, they may look at this and say, well, if he's such a bad guy, maybe it's not such a bad thing that we're involving ourselves into the country. I don't like this idea of legitimizing the first premise, because the first premise gives a certain degree of legitimacy to the second premise, even though in reality it doesn't. I hope that makes sense. I could be wrong in my assessment of this again. I strongly suspect that what Bernie Sanders wanted to just say is this. We must not be in the business of regime change. But he felt that he needed to legitimize the arguments that have been being made. That's what I think. That's what I think. Let's see what other people think. I know there are other people here, so am I wrong on this? Am I wrong? Like, don't misunderstand me. I don't fully know why this bugs me so. I mean, I think it's the first two segments.
Is this super chat?
Yeah, I think it's the first two segments. Pope reality. Give Bernie a break. He's not Superman. He responded. He's dealing with enough to establishment issues. Pop reality. Fair enough. I mean, like I said, I could be wrong on this. And by the way, I am not hitting him hard on this. This was originally named Bernie Sanders' perversely inadequate response. And I was like, well, it's not perversely inadequate. I mean, his response is right. I mean, at the very end, the response is right. He has certain political things that he has to deal with. And in dealing with those political things, he puts the first two segments in. By the way, if you listen to Bernie Sanders talk about anything that's unpopular, meaning unpopular opinion, he does this. He gives the first, essentially bolstering the initial argument first in order to cover himself from being attacked by people who may associate him with it. So if he's talking about Assad, he may say Assad is a brutal, vicious dictator, but we shouldn't go into the process of regime change. We're saying something similar here. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm being too harsh. He is further out than anybody else, with the exception of Tulsi Gabbard, on this issue, of at least making the point that we should not be in the process of regime change. So, good for that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong on this. Maybe I'm being too harsh. I see, I guess my feeling on this is, we have a clear, bloody track record in Latin America, in South America. And with that clear, bloody track record, we are instigating and behaving in ways that is going to create a crisis in Venezuela. And it's probably going to be an armed crisis in Venezuela, especially since the military is not leaving, what's his name? And if anything, you may get a fracturing and a breaking away of certain elements of the military that may end up in this kind of civil war. Now, the United States knows this. The United States doesn't care about this. And I guess Sanders knows this. But I guess there's political realities. So, fair enough. Fair enough. There's got to be more anti-war advocates in Congress from either side. Agreed. Bob Ramirez, Sanders is being used to test market a narrative. I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, look, Sanders is going to run in the primary, more likely than not. Sanders can't get through the primary. Sanders knows his base is anti-war. Just saying. By the same token, Sanders has political realities that Sanders has to deal with. Regardless of what his base is, he has to deal with, let's say, elements of the party, a Democratic Party, that would like to associate him with Venezuela and try to point fingers saying, aha, look at this socialist who's defending that socialist country. So maybe I'm being too harsh here. Maybe I need to be more forgiving of the political realities that Sanders has to deal with. So fair enough. Fair enough. Maybe I'm being too harsh. Maybe I'm being too harsh. Pop reality, you might be right. You might be right. He did come out saying we shouldn't be involved in the coups. And I've kind of made this argument myself of it doesn't really matter what's going on from the standpoint of Maduro. We shouldn't be instigating ourselves in the countries. And you can make a case that that's essentially what Sanders is saying. Cloud Illusion, do another funny prank video call and let's scare your mom with flowers. That's funny. Sanders admits Hillary's political savvy. Oh, God. Yes, Jamal. Always compromise your principles to provide cover for your war machine. Is totally working for Bernie, too. But see, is that what he's doing? Is that what he's doing? I mean, certainly he's not supporting Trump. I mean, he's not. Come on. I mean, Trump is being open-mouthed in regards to trying to take down the Venezuelan government. It's not, in fact, the entire United States government is. New York Times, Reuters, Wikipedia, all of these organizations, for the most part, conform to what the United States has been saying on this front. Sanders, in this tweet, is putting himself out further to the left. Now, you could say that the first two are supporting the basic narrative, so fair enough. And maybe that's my issue, or that's my angst with this tweet. It's the first two, not the last one, the first two. The Maduro government is waging a violent crackdown on Venezuelans. I think it's that. I think it's these two. This feeling that he needs to legitimize the basic narrative that's taken place from Venezuela. I guess my problem with this is if you allow the legitimization of the first two narratives, it makes it harder to argue the last. Especially for the people in the United States who are okay with this thing of toppling other governments, but simultaneously screaming at the top of their lungs about Russia and Facebook Twitter ads. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. All right, I'm going to end this. This connection has been stable. Let me know what you think. Am I being too much of a hard ass on this? Pop Reality says, yes, I am being too much of a hard ass on this. Cynical Optimist, protests by all withdraw our money from our banks. I have a credit union. I don't use a bank, so I'm already there. The Overton window is real. Let's not be extremely pessimistic. Pop Reality, yes. But do I have a point? Like, I give you credit. I agree with you to some degree. I may be being a hard ass on this. So fair enough. Fair enough. If I am being a hard ass, it is because of certain sensitivities that have been created with our behavior around the globe, particularly with regards to Latin America. Not to mention, after reading, like literally within the last month, maybe 2 months, finishing the book Blowback, I guess a little sensitive to the stuff that takes place in Latin America, because many of these coups I was reading about in depth before this story came out. things that you have to do politically, man, they're just like, if Bernie Sanders was running in the race, and Bernie Sanders was making an argument that we don't need to go into Syria, meaning it's illegal for us to be in these wars in Yemen, Syria, working with Saudi Arabia, all that stuff. And if mainstream media is on a different tact, Assad is a brutal dictator, Assad is a horrible guy, Assad is doing this, Assad is working with the Russians, Assad, blah, blah, blah. Chuck Todd, all the way. Sanders, instead of having to go through all that, meaning to cut through all that, I suppose it's easier to say Assad is a brutal dictator, but like, not necessarily challenging the main narrative, but essentially going around the main narrative may be more effective politically, but it's greatly distasteful from the standpoint of a base that looks at this and says, you know the reality of this, and you know the image that these guys are projecting, and you know the image that they're projecting is somewhat of a false one. But he's stuck going along with this false image for political reasons. Now, some people may say that's disingenuous, but let's be honest, he's a politician, and politicians have to behave in particular ways. You're being soft on Bernie because he's your boy, John Hill. You think I'm being soft on him. Pop reality, you're basically hard on Bernie because we hold him in such a high esteem. That is true, Pop. That's true, by the way. I agree with that. But that's not a bad thing. I mean, for the last, 40 years, 30, 40 years, the left, I call them the politically abused spouse of the Democratic Party, because they've accepted this narrative that this is all you can do. The best that you can hope for is incremental politics around the side. So every so often we're going to throw you a crumb, and you're going to be happy for that crumb, and you're going to accept that crumb. And we are still going to do right-wing stuff. We're going to pass our tax cuts. We may cut Social Security. We may, do all of this stuff for the priorities of a top 1%. We're going to protect the banks. We're going to let homeowners go bust. We're not going to pass healthcare. When we do pass healthcare, we're still going to leave 20, 30 million people off the roads while simultaneously proclaiming that we have universal healthcare. We're going to do all those things. Now, if that's your reality and you've just sat back and allowed that to happen without making too much of a peep, and then finally you start feeling yourself, you have a little gas on your chest, and you start making this point of, no, I'm done with this idea of letting people skate, and I'm going to hold people politically accountable for the things that they say and the things that I want to accomplish in the world. Meaning, the point of politics is not just putting someone in office. The point of politics is because you want the world, the things in the wider world, and your objective reality to change. That would be the political test, right? Whether or not something is politically effective or not has to do with whether or not you can get changes in your political reality. Look back from the standpoint of FDR to now. You can make an argument that the Overton window has shifted within regards to banks, capitalists, all that stuff. New Deal Democrats were ousted. And then you got these third-way Democrats, which became the norm. That became the hegemonic viewpoint of the political space from the standpoint of the Democratic Party. And the fight that's taking place, and the fight that I would argue that needs to take place, is for the soul of the left. What does the left represent? What does the left stand for? And it's the best that you can get is, moving deck chairs around of a sinking ship. I don't think that that's the best that you can get. I think that a better world is possible. But I don't think you get to that better world by propping up people who support and propagate the current world that you're in. And let's be honest, sometimes chaos is one of those things that allows for the potential for change. I'm harder on Sanders because I know that he knows better. So, pop reality, you're right. John Hill, I disagree with you. I don't think I'm soft on Sanders. In fact, I think it's the opposite. I think pop reality, I think you're right. I think I tend to be more, I tend to be hard on Sanders because I think Sanders knows better. That if you sat down over coffee and you had a conversation with Sanders about our behavior in Latin America, he probably can read you chapter and verse on the behavior of the United States, particularly with regards to the CIA and the things that the country were doing in order to put pressure on the governments in Latin America and instituting right-wing dictators. They were brutal, vicious regimes. He knows it. He also knows that the behavior that the United States has taken right now in current present day 2019 is similar to what was taking place back then. Meaning the behaviors and the techniques that we used to undermine governments back then are similar to the behaviors and the techniques that we're using now. And just because people don't have a historical context on those things, meaning they can't look at those things from the context of history because they weren't around during that time, it looks different to them, even though the events are the same or the events are extraordinarily similar. I know he knows this. I know he knows this. So yeah, I tend to be harder on him because I know he knows this. So fair enough. Edward Klein, Bernie knows exactly what he's doing. He's being a puppet. Man, I disagree with that. It's funny. You guys are making my opinion. You guys are changing my opinion on this. Look at what's being said. So let's be clear. How is this being a puppet? I disagree with needing to put this first two parts. Only part you need is this. If I'm not mistaken, the only part that Tulsi Gabbard put was this. You can argue that him recounting the mainstream narrative is him being a puppet. But a puppet for who? Who is the puppeteer in this? Donald Trump? Like, there's political winds. There is a political force that's being applied. If you look up the news stories on Venezuela, I don't know if you've checked this out. U.S. recognizes Venezuela opposition. Venezuela military backs Maduro. At least 20 dead in Venezuela. Many of the stories are taking the perspective of the West because we're in the West. Now, if you're sitting and talking to Mr. Oblivious Chuck Todd, New York Times, and all these mainstream establishment papers are going to take the perspective that Maduro is a brutal dictator that is trying to rule his country with an iron fist, and he's crushing dissent, and he's doing all this stuff. But Sanders knows better. Whether that's true or not, a lot of that has to do with it being in opposition to a hostile force. I mean, come on. If the United States was in a war with Russia, do you think that the United States would allow people to be dogging the United States? Meaning, do you think that they would allow opposition forces within the United States to get resources and support from the Russian government without there being a consequence to those things? No, they would hire the person for treason. They would put the person in prison. Now, when Maduro does that, it's a big deal. I guess I'm saying, as a person sitting on the moon, looking at events on Earth, there's a double standard that's being used. If something was taking place here in the United States, they would be a different thing. For example, if in France, the Yellow Vest movement, if the leaders of the Yellow Vest movement were found to be getting resources and money from the Russian government, what would be the response of France? And what would be the response of other countries in Europe? What would they do to the people who were getting the money from the Russian government? Do you think they would allow them to continue to dissent and protest? Or do you think they would put those people in prison? I guess I'm trying to get this thing of stop looking at the world for the moment from your country's lens and taking the perspective of the country. For the moment, look at it through the eyes of the country itself. And what, if it was you, what would you do? That's all. That's the basic premise that I'm making here. Again, this is nothing to do with whether Maduro is a good guy or not. I guess I'm asking this question of what would you do in a similar situation? Let's say you weren't an authoritarian government. Would you become somewhat of an authoritarian government if you knew that opposition forces in countries that was against your interests, that was trying to take down your government, was supporting opposition forces in that government? And wouldn't it by definition be treasonous? What do you do for treason? What do you do for treason? My point is this. It's possible that from a political standpoint, it is easier. It is a path of least resistance to accept a basic premise while simultaneously saying that just because this premise is true doesn't necessarily mean the premise is valid. Yes, it's, nice day outside, but it doesn't necessarily mean I need to, walk to the beach. Maybe I can still drive my car. That's a horrible representation. I'm just making a point that just because something is true doesn't necessarily mean action. So say, for example, Syria. if it was found that Bashar al-Assad had gassed his people, just because he did that doesn't necessarily automatically mean that the United States is allowed to attack the country. I mean, particularly if it doesn't have anything to do with us. Our laws are not just these malleable things that people can fuck around with. How do you sell out to a political committee? Hank Moultrie. I already explained why. If Bernie could accomplish showing the liberals a way that could be against these coups before they happen, rather than admitting they were a mistake 5 years later, now that would save us. Maybe that's the thing that bugs me. Authoritarianism in Socialist Countries by Michael Peretti is a very worthwhile 7-minute video. I love Michael Peretti to watch on YouTube. If anybody interested in what Jamal is saying here, love Peretti. Peretti is a fucking force of nature. His lectures on Rome are awesome and amazing. When he gets into talking about Julius Caesar and all this other stuff and how Julius Caesar was a populist, Peretti is fascinating, man. Angry-maniac, but fucking fascinating. Bernie is 100% the only chance for a small change. The rest are corporate tools. Dax Jacobs, agreed. 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 Pop reality, I think I'm agreeing with you, man. John Hill, you always hits Bernie's with pillows. What do you mean I hit it with a pillow? I did a video saying that Sanders was perversely inadequate on this. How am I hitting it with a pillow? How am I hitting it with a pillow? I mean, what did you want me to do? Start cursing at him? I said Bernie Sanders' inadequate response to the coup in Venezuela and the politics of unpopular opinion. I don't know what you want me to say here. I mean, ultimately, I disagree with the first two sentiments because I don't think you give standing to the original premise. But the last one, to somewhat redeems it, because his argument is right in the last one. I also was honest about the politics of what's taking place and why he does this two-step. And you can find this two-step in other interviews when he's talking about things like Syria or Yemen or this type. When there's an unpopular opinion to be had, Bernie Sanders almost tries to have it two ways. But he does that for political reasons. That's my only point here. I don't think I'm hitting it with a pillow. I think my point is on point. I think I'm right. All right, I'm going to end this. I'm always hitting Bernie Sanders with pillows. Whatever. I'm not hitting him with a pillow. I'll end it here. I hope I made sense in this. Give me your opinion. I mean, that's depending if somebody is still here 38 minutes later. Give me your opinion. It's Twitter. Foreign policy is not expressed well there. I agree with you, but did he need the first two? Like, Sanders, honestly, could have just put this last one. We must learn from the lessons of the past and not be in the business of regime change or supporting coups as we have in Chile. He could have just had that. That could have been the entirety of the tweet. I understand that you can't go into foreign policy dissertation, but right here, that could have been the entirety of the tweet. He felt he needed to put these other two in for political reasons. That's my point. Now, you may say, well, dude, that's not that big of a deal. He's a politician, and so he has to do those things for political reasons, etc., etc., etc. It is also my job, though, to point out the problems with this perspective, and while legitimizing it is problematic. It gets you one step closer to the coup by legitimizing the premise that they're using for the coup. Just saying. Maybe that's probably my issue with it. So, I will end this here. He's still my guy. So let's, you know, there's no deviation on that point. But and part of the reason that he is still my guy is because regardless of my annoyance with this, I have no expectation that people are going to be 100% on my side on issues. That's the first point. Second point, he has political realities that I don't have. So if I'm being fair, I have to accept that there are political realities that I don't have. Second point. Third point is at least he said this. At least he said it. We can't continue to go into the foreign coups and stuff like that. At least he said it, which, with the exception of Tulsi Gabbard, is further than anyone else that I've seen. So, when I say he's my guy, he's still my guy. The internet has been rock solid. So it was a computer. It wasn't a signal. So this one has been working without any issue at all. Now I'm going to keep this computer scaled down and only use it for the show itself. So we should have better shows from here on out from the standpoint of signal strength. Not going to wait on that. Cloud illusion. Why is Bernie Sanders still your guy? Tulsi has nicer jugs. That's funny. Slightly sexist, but funny. I need to hear Tulsi. Explain stuff. Like, I want her to explain her position on torture. I want her to get into her position from the standpoint of Modi. I want her to dig into these issues in a much larger, more full-throated way. And right now, I don't have that full-throated thing. I haven't necessarily dismissed her because it seems like the Democratic Party has been just trying to smear her and take her out. So I'm not on board on that. I think that's nonsense. But I do want to hear what she has to say. And I like her position on this. And yes, she's damn attractive, which always helps. It always helps. It's like he's staring at the president, giving her a speech. And it's like, I don't know what she said. I'm voting for whoever Jamarl is voting for. I'm voting for Sanders, Clyde. I'm voting for Sanders. Yeah, I'm voting for Sanders. All right. I'm going to end this there. Edward Klein, I love Tulsi. I like Tulsi, but I need to hear more from her. The torture thing is disturbing, though. I'm sorry. That's extremely disturbing. Did you hear her? Like, they asked her the question, and to be fair, I'm going to do a video that Sam Cedar did. And because Sam Cedar is putting words in her mouth. That's the first point. But Sam Cedar's not fully wrong on that point. The other videos, some of those other videos are nonsense. But on the torture video, where they asked her about the torture report, where they're talking about like rectal feedings and all this other stuff, and she's like, I'm conflicted on that report. What are you conflicted on? What are you conflicted on? Your country was brutally torturing people. Is this really what you want your fellow soldiers to do? I mean, part of the reason of the come to Jesus moment that Tulsi said she had was because she saw her troops getting killed in the foreign wars. Hopefully she's read War's Racket, or what's the other one? The Economic Hitman, I think it's Perkins, that gives her a different context on the standpoint of what the military has been doing in the various countries around the globe. But either way, however she had her come to Jesus moment in regards to the judicious use of military force, you know, I'm glad you're here. I don't care how you got here. I'm glad you're here. Why would she want her fellow soldiers torturing other human beings? And the ticking time clock perspective that she gave is not something that has been represented at all. Not saying that that can exist, but positing that as a scenario, as if that's the scenario. You know, it's like this 0.000% chance of occurring, and you're arguing from the perspective of that 0.00% chance. So that's disturbing to me. But I need to hear her talk about it. So beyond just that little second clip. So, you know, don't legitimize the party or the system, stay home. Oh man, I can't agree with that. They sure do love to smear Tulsi. Yes, they do. Yes, they do, Grandma Christine. You know, part of the reason that they smear Tulsi, part of the reason that Cedar and these guys smear Tulsi is because she came out for Sanders. She came out early on for Sanders, quit her job as part of the Democratic Party, I mean, in that capacity as the Democratic Party, and backed Sanders. And she ends up getting this really dirty, nasty letter from the Hillary clan for doing so, but she did it anyway. Mind you, the risk that was associated with it, she did it anyway. So, in essence, yeah. I mean, so part of the reason they hate her is for that. Also, they dislike her because she was willing to buck the trend on the war party. That was the other part. What's up with the camera? It looks like a Smurf, not because of the hat. What? What are you talking about? Oh, my color is off? Oh, that's what it is. My color's off. John Hill. See, with Tulsi, he's got questions with Bernie pillows. Oh. I'm not gonna take a lesson from you, buddy. Disparaging me. Yes, you look green. I'm changing colors. Let's see. Maybe I'm too close to the camera. It's a new rig, so it might be a little weird. Yeah, I'll fix it. I'll fix it after this video. I just need to push the camera back. Look, if you're asking me whether why I have questions with Sanders versus Tulsi, Sanders ran a race in 2016. Have you forgotten that? And in running the primary in 2016, Sanders' positions have for the most part been the same positions for the past 40 years. He's been making this kind of new effort to talk about foreign policy and to deal with, multiculturalism and stuff like that. But his positions have been his positions. Tulsi Gabbard is rather new on the political scene. And in being somewhat new on the political scene, she said certain things where, yeah, I want her to answer. Yeah, I'm just saying. It's like a mood ring. For fuck's sake. Yeah. I'll fix it. All right. Let me fix this because people are calling me a Smurf and saying I'm turning blue. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. Next month, my wife and I are redoing Patreon Appreciation. We're going to re-kickstart that. And what I'm going to end up doing is on the after show, I'm going to cut those videos and have them available for my patrons. It's like part B of the show or something like that. So we're going to start a new drive and push in order to up the patron thing. Because I got to be honest, between Patreon and YouTube, I don't trust YouTube. I can't trust YouTube because at any time it's a multinational corporation. They can cut your signal on a whim. And because they can do that, it puts you at somewhat of a disadvantage. We don't have unions. We don't have anything else. So I think the way to do that is to push either for the Patreon or the PayPal. And look, I appreciate both. I need to find a way to give that content to people who give through PayPal. But beyond that, that's the plan for the show. Also, I have several interviews today. One is an environmentalist, and the other, in fact, two environmental interviews. One for Extinction Rebellion, and the other one is an environmentalist that contacted me and sent me his book. So I will end this here. All right. It always starts a conversation when I bring up Sanders. So I love the conversation. Let me know what you guys think. Am I being too hard on Sanders? Am I being too soft on Sanders? Put it down in the comments, and we may be able to talk about it in another video because it seems like Sanders is always a good topic of discussion. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks all.